Nightfall in the Park. Story 1. The Night Hiker. Ava had always been an adventurous person, never one to shy away from a challenge. So when she heard the legend of the monster that lurked in Queen State Park, she couldn't resist the temptation to see it for herself. She gathered a group of friends and they planned a hiking trip in the park, determined to prove that the legend was just a silly story. As they set out on their hike, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and animals, and the sun was shining down on them. It was the perfect day for a hike. But as the sun began to set, the forest started to change. The once vibrant colors turned dull, and the sounds of wildlife faded away. The group's laughter and chatter died down as they walked in silence, their senses on high alert. As darkness fell, the group decided to set up camp for the night. They built a fire and cooked their dinner, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of their stomachs. They knew that they were alone in the woods, and that the legend of the monster was never far from their minds. As they settled in for the night, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She couldn't explain why, but she knew that something was out there in the darkness. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but as the night wore on, her fear grew stronger. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from the woods. It was a low growl, followed by the sound of leaves rustling underfoot. The group huddled together, their hearts racing. They could see nothing in the darkness, but they knew that something was out there. Then, they saw it. A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, and a monstrous figure stepped into the light of the fire. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. Its skin was a sickly green, its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its long, sharp claws were poised for attack. The group scattered in all directions, but it was too late. The monster was too fast, too strong. One by one, they were caught and dragged off into the darkness, their screams echoing through the forest. Ava ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the monster's footsteps behind her, getting closer with each passing moment. She knew that she was going to die, that she was never going to make it out of the forest alive. Just when she thought it was all over, she saw a glimmer of light in the distance. She ran towards it, her legs burning with exhaustion. As she reached the light, she saw that it was a cabin. Without hesitation, she burst through the door, slamming it shut behind her. The cabin was small and dimly lit, but it was a refuge from the darkness outside. Ava caught her breath and looked around, trying to figure out where she was. There were no signs of life, no signs of the monster. It was just her, alone in the cabin. As she tried to calm her racing heart, she heard a noise coming from outside. It was a scratching sound, like something was trying to claw its way through the door. Ava's fear returned, and she realized that the monster had found her. She looked around the cabin for something, anything, that could help her defend herself. Her eyes fell on a fireplace poker, and she grabbed it with trembling hands. She held it tightly, ready to defend herself from whatever was on the other side of the door. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. Ava held her breath, waiting for the monster to burst through the door, but nothing happened. The scratching sound was replaced by a low growl, and then silence. Ava knew that she couldn't stay in the cabin forever. She had to find a way out of the forest, to get back to civilization. But she also knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for her. As she made her way to the door, she heard a noise coming from the other side. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing. Ava's heart raced as she slowly opened the door, peeking out into the darkness. She saw the monster, crouched down in the shadows. It was breathing heavily, its eyes fixed on her. Ava froze, unsure of what to do next. The monster didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just watched her, waiting for her to make a move. Ava knew that she couldn't outrun the monster. She knew that she couldn't fight it off with just a fireplace poker. But she also knew that she had to try. She took a deep breath, gripping the poker tightly in her hands, and stepped out of the cabin. The monster stood up, its massive frame towering over her. Ava could see the hunger in its eyes, the thirst for blood. She knew that she was going to die, but she refused to go down without a fight. She swung the poker at the monster, striking it across the face. It roared in anger, its claws slashing at her. Ava dodged the attack, swinging the poker again and again. The fight lasted for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was just a few minutes. Ava was bruised and battered, but she refused to give up. She swung the poker one last time, striking the monster in the chest. It stumbled backwards, its eyes glazing over. Ava collapsed to the ground, exhausted and injured. She knew that she had won the fight, but at what cost? She had lost all of her friends, and she was injured and alone in the middle of a dark forest. As she lay there, she heard the sound of sirens in the distance. She knew that help was on the way. She closed her eyes, praying that she would make it out of the forest alive. When she woke up, she was in a hospital bed. Her injuries were severe, but she was going to make a full recovery. She was relieved, but also haunted by the memories of the night hiker, the monster that had almost taken her life. From that day forward, Ava never went hiking again. She knew that there were things in the world that were beyond her control, things that were better left undiscovered. The night hiker was one of those things. A monster that lurked in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. Months had passed since Ava's encounter with the night hiker. She had tried to put the memories of that night behind her, but they lingered in the back of her mind, like a shadow waiting to emerge. One day, while on a walk in the nearby woods, Ava found herself lost. The trees all looked the same, and the sun was beginning to set. Panic set in as she realized she was running out of daylight, and the forest became eerily quiet. As she walked, she heard a faint rustling sound coming from the trees ahead. Her heart raced as she cautiously made her way toward the source of the sound. Suddenly, the rustling stopped, and the woods fell silent once again. Ava knew that she was being watched, but she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Fear took hold of her as she realized that the night hiker had returned. She turned and ran as fast as she could, but the monster was faster. It pursued her through the woods, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground behind her. Ava felt like her heart was going to burst out of her chest as she ran, but she refused to give up. As she stumbled through the forest, she saw a light in the distance. It was a small cabin, with smoke rising from the chimney. She ran toward it, hoping that someone would be inside. When she reached the door, she banged on it, screaming for help. The door opened, and an old man appeared. He looked at her with concern and brought her inside, closing the door behind her. As she caught her breath, Ava explained what had happened. The old man listened carefully, his face turning pale as she described the monster that had been chasing her. "That's the night hiker," he said in a low voice. "I've heard stories of him for years. He's a demon, sent from hell to haunt the woods and prey on those who dare to enter." Ava's blood ran cold as she realized that the monster was real, that it wasn't just her imagination playing tricks on her. She knew that she had to get out of the woods, to leave the night hiker behind once and for all. The old man offered to guide her out of the forest, and Ava accepted his offer gratefully. They made their way through the woods, the old man pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the creatures that lurked in the darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the forest. Ava breathed a sigh of relief as she saw the familiar landscape, the safety of civilization. As she turned to thank the old man, he was gone. Ava looked around, but he had vanished into thin air. She knew then that he had been sent by some higher power to guide her to safety and protect her from the night hiker. From that day forward, Ava never ventured into the woods alone again. She knew that the night hiker was still out there, waiting for its next victim, but she also knew that she had survived, and that she would never forget the terror of that night in the woods. Story 2: The Camper's Nightmare. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for 4 friends: Nick, Sarah, Matt, and Alex. They had planned to go camping in the remote wilderness of the national park, far from civilization and the stresses of daily life. Little did they know that their weekend would turn into a nightmare they would never forget. They arrived at the campsite on Friday afternoon, excited to begin their adventure. They set up their tents and built a campfire, enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. As the sun began to set, they settled in for the night, eager to get a good night's sleep before a day of hiking and exploring. But as they slept, strange noises began to fill the air. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the woods beyond the campsite. The campers tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the sounds of the wilderness, but the noises persisted throughout the night. The next morning, they set out to explore the park. They hiked through the woods, marveling at the beauty of the landscape, but the strange noises from the night before continued to haunt them. It was as if someone, or something, was following them through the woods. As they made their way back to the campsite, they found that their tents had been torn apart. Their belongings were scattered all over the ground, and it was clear that something had been through their campsite while they were gone. Nick and Matt took charge, trying to rationalize what had happened. They decided that it was probably just a bear or some other wild animal, and they set about rebuilding their campsite. But as night fell, the noises grew louder and more persistent. The footsteps seemed to be circling the campsite, as if the creature was toying with them. Fear took hold of the campers as they huddled around the campfire, hoping that it would keep the creature at bay. But it was no use. As they slept, the creature attacked. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. It was tall and thin, with impossibly long limbs and razor-sharp claws. It moved with incredible speed, tearing through their tents and attacking the campers with ferocity. Sarah was the first to go. The creature tore her apart before their eyes, and the campers knew that they were next. They ran through the woods, desperately trying to escape the creature's clutches. But it was no use. The creature was too fast, too strong. It hunted them through the darkness, its blood-curdling screams echoing through the woods. Finally, they came to a clearing. The moon shone down on them, illuminating the creature's grotesque features. It was like something out of a nightmare, a creature of pure terror. Nick and Alex tried to fight it off, but it was too powerful. They were no match for the creature's strength and agility. They could only watch in horror as it tore them apart, one by one. Matt was the last one standing. He knew that he was the only one left, the only one who could tell their story. He ran through the woods, his heart pounding in his chest, until he finally reached the park ranger station. When he burst through the doors, covered in blood and shaking with fear, the rangers didn't believe him. They thought that he was just another crazy camper, lost in the wilderness. But when they went back to the campsite, they found the evidence of the creature's attack: the torn tents, the scattered belongings, the bloodstains on the ground. They knew then that something terrible had happened, something that they could never explain. Matt was never the same after that night. He never spoke of the creature again, never went camping. In the wilderness, he spent the rest of his life haunted by the memories of that fateful weekend, the screams of his friends echoing in his mind. The rangers never found any evidence of the creature's existence, but rumors persisted among the locals. Some believed that it was a spirit of the wilderness, angry at the intrusion of humans into its domain. Others believed that it was a monster of legend, born from the darkness of the woods. Regardless of what it was, the camper's nightmare had become a cautionary tale for those who ventured into the wilderness. It was a reminder that there are things out there that we cannot explain, that the darkness holds secrets that are better left undiscovered. For years, the campsite lay abandoned, a memorial to the tragedy that had occurred there. But there were those who were brave enough, or foolish enough, to venture back into the wilderness, hoping to uncover the truth behind the camper's nightmare. Some claimed to have seen the creature, its long limbs and razor-sharp claws slashing through the darkness. Others claimed to have heard its blood-curdling screams, echoing through the woods like a warning. But most never returned, lost to the darkness of the wilderness, their fate unknown. And so, the legend of the camper's nightmare lived on, a reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot comprehend, that the wilderness is not always a place of peace and solitude, but of danger and terror.